Hi, I'm Carlin Borisenko. In early 2020, I was the knitting Democrat who accidentally went viral on the internet for going to a Trump rally and then left the party. I became the conservative darling, was on all the shows, traveled around the country, and then realized that conservatives were no better than Democrats. If there's one thing that I've learned, it's that both political tribes are two sides of the same coin. But it wasn't all bad. On my journey, I became obsessed with understanding the woke ideology and the culture war. I broke the story of the city of Seattle doing segregated training with its employees.
How bad has this stuff become? The city of Seattle has now put out, I'm not kidding you, this is according to Dr. Carolyn Borisenko, who's an organizational psychologist. The city of Seattle asked its white employees to voluntarily spend a day off in a training about their internalized racial superiority.
I broke the story that led to the first ever federal lawsuit against critical race theory in the schools. I broke the Coke Be Less White story, one of the biggest anti-woke stories of all time. It got over 30 million views. Coca-Cola's corporate headquarters even had to change their outgoing voicemail.
Throughout the past few days, you may have seen inaccurate reporting on the content of our recently launched diversity, equity, and inclusion training program.
I exposed the schools in Burlington, Vermont for grooming middle school children live on the internet. They called me an unwoke cult leader for that. And the Vermont Human Rights Commission slandered me publicly as being a hate channel. I even got called a hero in Breitbart for exposing that the Washington Post was writing a hit piece on Christopher Rufo. I have broken story after story after story about what's going on in the public schools, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to autistic sex education, to the Department of Education in Michigan, literally training teachers all over the state how to groom children. I wrote a book called Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life. I host a podcast all about fighting back, and I'm downloading all of my knowledge to you on my Substack, carlin.substack.com. The world is a crazy place. We are literally surrounded by cults on all sides. On this show, we're going to do a deep dive into all aspects of the culture war, and I will show you the dark, dystopian underbellies on both sides. Here are the commitments I'll make to you. I will always tell you the truth. I will always bring you receipts. And if you stick with me, I promise you will see the world differently. Welcome to the cult. Please mount that like button for me and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Well, hello, everyone. I am sorry for being a bit late today. You guys know Mondays are typically my busiest day of the week. I'm back to back from the moment I get up until the moment I hit this stream, and then I go directly from this stream into a supporter call, and then maybe by the time we hit about 11 o'clock at night, I finally have time to actually sit down and do some work for myself. So I do apologize for being a couple minutes late. We're gonna do a little bit of a so people who have been watching my streams for a while, you may have caught onto this. I'm kind of starting to tailor my streams around things I want to know. I think this is a matter of efficiency. I need to do a lot of research on things in order to be able to produce the content for my Substack, which is ding, carlin.substack.com. We'll talk about that more in a minute. I need to do a lot of research for things, and you guys seem to be interested in the same topics that I'm interested in. And so I think if I need to learn about a topic, the easiest way for me to learn about it is to do a stream about it with an audience and see how much of it that I can actually teach people. Because, fun fact, the fastest way to learn a topic and to gain mastery over a topic is to teach it to someone else. I used to do these I should go back and do these meditation workshops again because I love them. They're the best workshops in the world. If you've ever heard of a guy named Dr. Joe Dispenza, Dr. Joe Dispenza is a genius. His meditation workshops changed my life in so many ways. They're so good. They're so well done. I have done every level of his meditation workshops, even the really crazy ones where when you get into the upper, this is just a side note, but when you get into the upper level of Dr. Joe's meditation workshops, you start basically getting up at odd hours in the middle of the night to meditate. Like in one of them, you get up and you start meditating at 4 a.m. because at 4 a.m. that's when your melatonin level in your brain is at the highest level. And what that means is that it's easier to get you into like the brain waves that you need to be in to do really effective meditation. There were meditation workshops that I did where we would sleep all day and he would start the meditation classes around 1 a.m. And then you would do like the meditation class at 1 a.m. and then you go right into the meditation and then you sleep for a couple hours like on the floor in the conference center. And then you go out and you do a walking meditation on the beach at like 7 a.m. Those are pretty great. Anyway, the reason I bring up Dr. Joe is because one of the reasons his workshops are so effective is he will teach you something and then you have to turn to your neighbor and explain to your neighbor what he just taught you. So that's a really good way to be in making sure the ideas that you're learning are ingrained in your head is to learn something and then immediately try to teach it to another person. Just a fun fact, if you ever really want to gain mastery over a topic really, really quickly, just pretend you're an expert in it and teach it to other people and voila, you will become an expert in it, in the teaching of it to other people. And that's what we're doing here today. Because listen, I need to learn more about Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Pedagogy of the Oppressed is a book by Paulo Freire that James Lindsay would argue is in every school district in America. In fact, I just want to read just a couple paragraphs from James Lindsay's excellent book that has like water stains over it because I was using it as a coaster for a little while as I was reading it. The excellent book, The Marxification of Education. Don't let the water stain on the front fool you. I was using it as a coaster, all right. that doesn't lessen the value of the knowledge within the book. It just indicated the place where the book was on my desk. I don't think you should be depressed about Millie. He's not out of it yet. There's going to be a runoff. Just like, hey, hold your head up high. Hopefully it turns out okay. He made it into the top 2. You know? I mean, probably there was cheating, but don't be depressed. It's a good sign. Listen, this is a separate topic, but how many people had to get their head around the idea of an anarcho-capitalist as president of Argentina for him to make it into the top 2? Even if there was cheating, right? Like that's a victory. If he's getting that many, like the one of the establishment candidates came in 3rd. That is an epic victory. So no matter what happens, like Viva Javier Milei, man, like he's doing great. He's like he really is like an anarcho-capitalist too. Like a lot of people on Twitter think he's fake. No, he like all the anarcho-capitalists I know in New Hampshire, like the hardcore people, love him. They've said he knows what he's talking about. He's read all the right things. He's like legit. So this is a good thing. This means a lot of people are responding to what's going on, and they're gonna have a runoff on November 9th, and we'll see what happens. There's nothing we can do until then. Anyway, I want to just read a couple paragraphs from the book, The Marxification of Education. What's going on here? Parents deserve to know. Our children deserve far better than this. Our nation and its future depend on correcting it. Well, that's actually a simple answer. The overwhelming primary reason why 94% of Providence, Rhode Island students are failing mathematics and 86% cannot read or write at grade level can turn out by hundreds of left-wing political demonstrations at the Rhode Island State House during school hours is unambiguous once understood. Education has been stolen right out from under us and from our children. This theft of education has a purpose. It enables a counterfeit to replace it. The mechanism and description of this gigantic educational ripoff can be summarized in one single sentence. Our kids go to Paulo Freire's schools. Chances are that unless you're a Brazilian, an educator, or deep into the front lines of the battles in the culture war, or a happy listener to my podcast, you've never heard of Paulo Freire and have no idea what this means. Well, you need to. Paulo Freire is easily the most influential name in education in a century. And as a result, as I said, our kids go to Paulo Freire's schools. So this whole book is essentially about how Paulo Freire's ideas in his book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, have taken over education in America. Now, Pedagogy of the Oppressed has been on my reading list for a while. I just haven't gotten to it. I just haven't done it. And so what I wanted to spend our time on today, because Monday streams are always a little bit limited in the amount of time I can actually spend on them because I have my supporter call at 7 p.m., is I wanted to watch a presentation specifically about Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And something funny happened, though, before I got started with the stream. See, we were going to watch this presentation. This was my plan. This was like a PowerPoint presentation that this woman had put together all about pedagogy of the oppressed and critical pedagogy, liberation theology. We know because it has the word liberation in it, that it's extra socialist and extra woke. This was going to be my plan. And then I popped this into my Chrome browser because I have to use this in Chrome to actually be able to stream the sound. And I looked over at the recommendations and I saw this one over here. Critical pedagogy as an antidote to neoliberal fascism. And I was like, oh shit. This actually sounds like my type of activist presentation. Let's read the description for it. Education is under attack. A recent example is that Florida book bans the Florida book bans in Florida. Not even a great sentence for people claiming to have to be the ones that are going to save education, but okay. Books that contain elements of critical race theory and social emotional learning or gender-related topics are forbidden in classrooms. Henry Giroux sees this, among many other things, as clear evidence that the right is systemically erasing America's true national history. True history, according to the left, is radical history, which means socialist history. Henry Giroux shines his light on current developments in society and education, and it doesn't look good. Critical pedagogy can be a part of the solution. And although Henry paints a grim picture, there is hope in his story as well. Young people all over the globe are protesting for their rights, the right to vote, to be educated, to be free of religious oppression, Iran being the prime example. Resistance is possible even in the most repressive regimes. Henry is said to turn 80 next year. But seeing him talk about his mission, his vision, and hope for the next generation, with that fiery passion in his eyes and voice, makes that very difficult to believe. So I thought, guys, instead of watching kind of this boring PowerPoint presentation, this seems a little bit more spicy to me. Anytime we see the term neoliberal fascism, what does fascism mean? Pop quiz for the chat. If we're speaking socialist, what does fascism actually mean if we're speaking socialist? Let me know. I thought this looked like a really good presentation to watch, and I was like, it is but fate that it has appeared in the recommendations on my thumbnails. Come on. Yes, fascism means capitalism. Fascism means capitalism. Fascism means capitalism. It means capitalism. It means capitalism. We know this because we watched a presentation about Antifa from Hofstra University in which they told us this. It means capitalism. They had a whole session about how fascism means capitalism. Well done. So that's what we're going to watch today, guys. Sit back. I really do hope it talks about the book a little bit. We might do other presentations on the book when I have a little bit more time. There were some other lectures from people like at Harvard and things like that I was looking at. But again, the time constraints today just like make it a little bit tough for me to watch something long. And that's because at 7 p.m. on Mondays, I have my supporter Zoom call. My supporter Zoom call is private. They are unrecorded. They are times when my community and I get to connect and just chat about whatever is going on in the world, whatever we want to talk about. They're pretty great. If you want to get access to my supporter Zoom call that starts at 7 p.m. Eastern time tonight, what you need to do is head over to my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. And what I want you to do is click on the Unwoke Roundup email that's right in the center of the page, and then scroll all the way down to the bottom. And underneath this red box right here, for everyone who is a paying supporter on my Substack for $8 a month or $80 a year, you are going to find a Zoom link. That Zoom link will take you to the call. You will find Wednesday's Zoom link there as well. You will also find access to the supporter Discord, All of those go out in my weekly newsletter on Substack. So if you become a supporter on Substack, that information will be right there waiting for you whenever you want to come and join us. And I definitely recommend, if you're a supporter and you haven't come and joined us for a community Zoom call, come meet the community. I have like the best community on the internet. I really actually do believe that. And we have a great time in our calls, and we will be doing one in about an hour and 40 minutes, which is why I have a little bit more of an abbreviated stream on Mondays. Kino, thank you for the super chat. I'm doing a TED Talk. Really? You're doing a TED Talk, Kino? That's exciting. Similar subject matter tonight. Wish you that's why you texted me. I'm so sorry, Kino. I didn't get a chance to call you because I've just been like busy and basically in meetings all day. So I apologize for that. But good luck. You're going to kill it. You know this stuff, bro. You know it. You've been following along a really long time. I have no doubt you're going to do such a great job, and we're going to be cheering you on. So everyone send positive wishes and energy to Kino. He's a great member of the community, and we love him dearly. All right, guys. With that out of the way, let's just jump right into our presentation for today. Critical pedagogy as an antidote to neoliberal fascism. Everyone, please do mount the like button for me. We don't smash the like button on my channel. We're not heathens. We're not hooligans. All right, we mount it like adults. If you don't want to mount the like button, you can caress the like button. You can shake hands with the like button. You can fist bump the like button. You can put your arm around the like button. You can do whatever you want to the like button except for smashing it. Let us know in the chat how you've greeted the like button today. And do make sure you are subscribed to my channel if you are not already. I stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. On Saturdays, we go live at 6 p.m. for Socialism Saturday. Let's learn about critical pedagogy as an antidote to neoliberal fascism. I hope this is in English. Tell me this is in English. We might have to go back to the other one.
Great. Henry, welcome back.
Yes, good to see you. How are you?
I'm good. It's been 2
Hey,
years since we...
as woke as he might be, can we just all acknowledge Henry's looking pretty good for 80 years old? Like, he's holding up well.
had our last conversation. And I decided to get in contact again because I think we should, well, it's my mission, and just as it is yours, to keep critical pedagogy alive. That means we should have a chat once in a while, not just you and me, but many teachers in the world about this critical pedagogy, especially in these times. I think it's really important that we keep this on the agenda. So what I would like to do today is to look at the current state of critical pedagogy and to explain to my viewers and my followers why it is important that we talk about this topic and what it...
I just want to say, Milk Tea Groiper, I'm glad to see you back in the chat. If any other Groipers are joining us today, you guys are welcome as long as you want to learn. I had a little bit of a kerfuffle with the Groipers over the weekend, with some of them not understanding that when I'm doing an educational stream, I really don't want them disrupted with nonsense. I understand people were just playing around. I don't blame Nick or anything. Nick can't control everyone on the internet at all times. But I am glad to see you back. I do hope other Groipers come and join us as well for some of these streams. And I just want everyone to know that even though I was a little pissy about this on Saturday, and I'm still a little pissy about it, and I really hope it doesn't happen again, like, Groipers are welcome here. We do not, like, just because some Groipers behave badly doesn't mean all Groipers behave badly. And so anyone who wants to learn is welcome here. And we appreciate you guys kind of just like reining it in. Milk Tea Groiper's never been a problem. And I don't think he's going to start today. So welcome back. Glad to see you.
Can do for education. So for starters, it was 2 years ago since we last spoke, and the pandemic has been going on for 2 more years. So if you have to look back on these 2 years, what are its highlights? What do you see as the most prominent events?
Well, I mean, one of the things I see is the erosion of democracy all over the world and the threat of nuclear war, not to mention the threat of ecological disaster, which are being ramped up, as you know, day by day. And I also, in some ways, see the
Guys, his volume is a little low. Sadly, I can't turn up their volume anymore. So here's what I'm going to do. We all need to work together to make this work. I'm turning down my microphone volume. And then what I need everyone to do is I need everyone to turn up the volume on their computers, just like I'm doing right now. And that way, hopefully, we'll make his volume a little bit louder while my mic volume is going a little bit quieter.
collapse of education as an emancipatory. I don't see the collapse, rather. I see an attack on education as an emancipatory and democratizing force. Public goods
Emancipatory
are
means
being attacked
liberation.
everywhere. And I think that what the right, whether it be in Hungary or whether it be in Italy or whether it be in Brazil, Sweden, what they realize is that education is central to politics and that schooling is far from neutral in the way that they talk about it. It's really a
Education is central. Remember, guys, this is the guy that's the expert in the pedagogy of the oppressed, right? Education is central to politics, and schooling is far from neutral.
struggle over agency, a struggle over power, and a struggle over how we want young people can define the future. And in that sense, it's pretty dangerous.
Young people can
They
define
don't
the
talk about
future.
critical pedagogy, they talk about critical race theory, because basically they're white supremacists. But in the final analysis, the larger issue for them is critical pedagogy. It is critical education or critical pedagogy in the direct.
All right, I'm sorry. I already need to clip this. This is just too fucking perfect. I'm sorry. Like this is like that. Like this is an example of like fate stepping in and saying, Carlin, you need to watch this specific presentation. I'm going to put it in the recommendations. All you need to do is watch it. Let's just clip that little bit. Stand by.
What they realize is that education is central to politics. Brazil, I think that what the right, whether it be in Hungary or whether it be in Italy or whether it be in Brazil, Sweden, what they realize is that education is central to politics and that schooling is far from neutral in the way that they talk about it. It's really a struggle over agency, a struggle over power, and a struggle over how we want young people can define the future. And in that sense, it's pretty dangerous to them. They don't talk about critical pedagogy, they talk about critical race theory, because basically they're white supremacists. But in the final analysis, the larger issue for them is critical pedagogy. It is critical education or critical pedagogy in the direct sense, because they recognize that the first casualty of authoritarianism are the minds that would oppose it. They understand that. And that's not just simply a political issue, it's an educational issue. So I think at one level, we can say that we've never seen such a wave of repressive education as we see now, with the banning of books, the attack on historical consciousness, historical memory, moral witnessing. But most importantly, the attack on education as a democratic public sphere and as a public good. That's a serious issue, because it seems to me that education in that sense is really the foundation for democracy. You know, I mean, the first thing that you have to think about when you think about what a democracy means is you have to ask yourself, are people informed enough to be able to understand it, defend it, embrace it, and struggle over it? And if you collapse the educational system and convince them that it's not a public good, but a private good or a private right, or it basically should be aligned with white supremacist, neo-fascist, for instance, ideologies, you have a society that's in crisis. And I think in many cases, we have societies now that are in crisis.
Whoa, there was a lot there, wasn't it? There was a lot there. Hang on, let me just make sure that clip is saved. I'm going to deal with that later. Oh, this guy's going to be a fucking gold mine. Thank you, YouTube gods, for giving me this recommendation. Prometheus says, is that why there is this insistence on kids being involved in forming curriculum in schools? Yes. That's exactly what, right. That comes from Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Anytime you are seeing these themes around kids teaching teachers, kids dictating education, kids being the leaders in their own education, stuff like that. That is all Paulo Freire. That is all pedagogy of the oppressed. Well done. Well, what do you think he means by democracy? What do you think he means? Because he doesn't actually mean democracy. What do you guys think they mean by democracy? Mary, when he calls people white supremacist, is that code for capitalist? Yes. Yes. Every single time, without fail. There are zero exceptions to this. Zero. Every single time you hear far left activists use anything like whiteness, white supremacy, racism, etc., 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 systemic racism, it is all code for capitalism. Every single time, there are no exceptions. Democracy is state controlled. Yup. Yeah, you could actually say democracy means equity, can't you? Because everyone has a equal vote. Dictatorship of the proletariat. Rottweiler, what do you think they mean when they say democracy? I'd be curious in your answer. Well, Tolkien fan, I mean, I think you can answer your own question. Why is it that they care so much about what others are doing or not doing? Why can't they just leave people well enough alone to make their own choices? Because the priorities of the woke left are all around power and control. The things that they care about more than anything else are power and control. One of the prime goals of the woke left is to get as much power as possible, to gain as much power as possible. I don't have a super chat from you, Tayton, so I can't do that. I've only gotten one super chat so far, and it wasn't from you. So the reason that they can't leave people well enough alone is because they believe that when people have the freedom to choose on their own, they choose wrong. They don't want people to have a choice. They want people to be able to choose from among the options that they give them. Does that make sense?
You teach at McMaster University, which is in Canada, which is a whole different
Uber woke.
country
Master Uber woke.
from the United States. So the current situation in America is and in the United States is very different from the Canadian one. When I look,
Rottweiler says that the definition of democracy when we're speaking socialist is that centralist social discipline is their idea of democracy, just as Mao defined democracy in his critique of liberalism. So centralist social discipline is what they mean by democracy. Can you give me a little bit more on that, Rottweiler? Because I know you know more on that. Can you just give me a few more sentences on what I want to be able to describe this like in a sentence that normal people would be able to wrap their heads around it. And I feel like you're the man for the job. Oh, there was a super chat before I went live. Well, all right. It's not showing up on my screen. Hang on 1 second. It means I have to go into the back end of YouTube to find it because it is not showing up on my screen. Let me see. Okay, I see it on the back end. Tayton said, thank you for that super chat, Tayton. I apologize it didn't come up in StreamYard. I didn't realize how scary city-owned parks and recreation were. I did a deep dive into it today, and it makes sense that they would be decolonizers. Yup. Yes, indeed. I appreciate that. Thank you.
look at Florida, where all these books are banned, and in other states as well, because they contain aspects of critical race theory and social emotional learning. Does Canada face the same challenges?
I think all the
Rottweiler says, basically is central control by the state of a means of production and what people can and cannot think. Okay, so when Rottweiler says that the socialist definition of democracy is centralist social discipline, that means that it's basically democracy central control by the state, and what you can produce is controlled by the state, or what, I mean, the state controls all the means of production, and what people can and cannot think is controlled by the state. Thank you, Rottweiler. I appreciate that.
These countries, in some fundamental way, have elements of fascism that are developing within them. Canada is not the United States. I mean, it still believes in a social democracy, it still believes in the social contract. Education is for the most part free.
Canada is socialist.
And it really believes
Canada
in civic
has
literacy,
fallen.
and it believes in however watered down it might be, what they call multicultural education. So it's very different from the United States. I think that what you see in the United States is a model of education developing that is basically a fascist.
Yeah, democracy is what the party thinks it is. That's better. Thank you, Rottweiler. Okay, so he's saying education in the United States is basically developing a fascist. What is this about?
Fascist model of education. I mean, I don't think there's any way that.
See, look at this. So he's saying he's saying that any education that the left does not control is a fascist model of education.
In the United States is a model of education developing that is basically a fascist model of education. I mean, I don't think there's any way else to put it. I mean, I wrote a piece recently called "The Nazification of American Education." And if you look at the similarities,
holy shit,
you can do it in a variety of historical contexts. It's not just Hitler's Germany, but if you look at Nazi Germany and the educational programs that were being enacted there,
why is he allowed to talk about Hitler, but I'm not?
In the United States, the banning of books, a logic of disposability. Certain groups were seen as unfit for citizenship, and therefore their histories were erased. Teachers basically had to take loyalty oaths. People who were not considered, white Christian, who were not considered good Nazis, are now equated with teachers who are not considered good Christians, white Christians. And so the similarities are really quite shocking. And I think the real question here is, what's the end point? Where does this go, right? I mean, when you substitute a notion of critical pedagogy in education that's critical for one that's utterly repressive, how do you then understand that within the context of a whole range of policies? And I think that one of the things.
So it's either they see it as a choice between either you're doing critical pedagogy or you're doing repressive pedagogy. So critical pedagogy is going to be about, like, how do we elicit the dictatorship of the proletariat, whereas repressive pedagogy is like the dictatorship of the bourgeois, is going to be my guess about what this means.
You have to understand is that what's under attack here is the very notion of a democratic consciousness. The very notion of a critical citizen, the very notion of young people who basically have the tools, the skills, the insights, the values, the whole power accountable. What we're seeing on a global level in education, and I want to say something about resistance in a minute. We're seeing a massive attempt at not only developing more refined tools of propaganda in the schools and more forms of repression, but we're seeing a giant machinery of depoliticization taking place. This is pedagogical depoliticization. That's basically what it is. These are tools of social and political abandonment, because first and foremost, critical pedagogy is a struggle.
He's pissed off because they are depoliticizing education. Did you guys catch that? He's like, God damn it, they're depoliticizing my beautiful public education. How dare those evil Nazi fascists depoliticize education? Let's listen again.
This is pedagogical depoliticization. That's basically what it is. These are tools of social and political abandonment, because first and foremost, critical pedagogy is a struggle over agency. It's a struggle over how people define themselves and their relationship to each other in the world. It's not just about knowledge, and it's not just about the consumption of knowledge, it's about the production of knowledge. And it's about the relationship between knowledge and power. And it's not just a method. It's far more than that. It's a moral and political project, as Paulo Freire and others, Gandhi and others have been saying, for years. And this is all under attack. At the same time, we're seeing forms of resistance against this. In Florida, students are going on strike, teachers are going on strike, and people are trying to figure out how to fight this, because the overwhelming nature of it is that it's no longer on the mind.
Rottweiler, what would we do without you? Honestly, Rottweiler is like one of the MVPs of this community. Fiere's Pedagogy is basically Fiere's contribution to solving the problem of social reproduction. We know social reproduction from Abolish the Family, through the infiltration of education and religion, since he was into liberation theology as well. Thank you for that context, Rottweiler. That's really, really, really helpful.
It's now at the center of power. It's at the center of power, I'm sure, increasingly in Sweden, at the center of power in Italy, at the center of power in Turkey, in Hungary, in Chile. I mean, the attack on critical thinking and on critical pedagogy, better, and the attack on education as a democratic public sphere represents one of the greatest threats to humanity outside of a nuclear war and ecological devastation that we now see. A mindless public is ready to be a fascist public.
It was Ron DeSantis who banned lots and lots of books in Florida because they would contain elements of critical race theory. Could you briefly explain what is meant by critical race theory?
He doesn't know what it is. Critical race theory is a legal theory that developed at Harvard.
It's not even in K through 12 schools. It's never in K through 12 schools. Critical race theory is definitely not in K through 12 schools.
It's mostly taught in graduate schools.
It's only taught in graduate schools.
It's not taught in high schools. It's not taught in public education.
It's not taught in public schools.
Basically just a metaphor for not teaching about slavery, not teaching about race relations, not teaching about racism, not raising fundamental questions about parts of American history that are uncomfortable, but yet need to be dealt with. Whether we're talking about the genocide of indigenous people, whether we're talking about the internment of the Japanese, whether we're talking about Jim Crow. This is an attempt to basically whitewash history in ways, and they have a perfect word for it. They call it patriotic education. And I think it's basically just massive propaganda. But I think that what is under attack here is not simply enabling students to deal with the complexity of history in both its strengths and its weaknesses, but it's an attack on historical consciousness itself. It's an attack on historical memory. And as an attack on historical memory, it's an attack on moral witnessing. You know, the ability to draw certain conclusions about what you don't want to see reproduced, being able to understand the legacy of those crimes, basically crimes, slavery, I'm sorry, you know, and how they still infect and in some ways shape the culture. They want to erase all of that. They have a Disney view of the world. You know, I mean, everything's white, everything's merry, everything's happy, and there are no black people to worry about. Women are in their place, they're having babies, and transgender people, well, we should kill all of them. I mean, they basically are really a curse on the planet. You know, it's very interesting to listen to DeSantis talk about history. He made a comment not too long ago when he said it was during the Revolution, the American Revolution, that basically an anti-slavery consciousness developed. That's nonsense. I mean, that's just pure nonsense. There was a long history of anti-slavery consciousness that developed by the slaves, you know, and by people writing about this. And not only that, I mean, the very momentum against slavery didn't begin to appear until 1806. I mean, this is a guy who lies in order to fashion a notion of history that is nothing but both dominating and rooted in.
Hang on. Rottweiler says social emotional learning is what they are doing to kids to indoctrinate them. Parents need to learn and to recognize it when they're checking their curriculum, all thanks to Fieri. You know, social emotional learning is something I really need to get into more. Like, I've done streams here and there about social emotional learning, but it's not out of my mind that it is a topic that I do need to delve into more. And like maybe going in through the Fieri route is a way to go to it. This is something I've been avoiding doing for a while. And so, you know, its time has come, I suppose.
In what I call in one book, a hurricane of manufactured ignorance. That's what we're talking about. You know, we're talking about education now on the side of manufactured ignorance, whitewashing history, eliminating historical.
Well, that's the ironclad law of woke projection.
Critical pedagogy from social responsibility, and completely emptying out the notion of citizenship as a universal.
Hang on. Eliza says, I admit trying to listen to people deep on this ideology sounds like people speaking in tongues and it doesn't make sense. That's not you, Eliza. That's them. That's because these people speak in a coded language. Everything they say is in a coded language. And so if it sounds like it's a foreign language to you, that's because it is. That's purposeful. That is a feature. That is not a bug. And so, but what you'll learn though is that if you allow yourself to just listen and ask questions, we will help you break them down. We will teach you what these things mean. And after a while, you will learn to speak the language. And it's just like if you didn't know how to speak French and I pick you up and I put you in the middle of France and I say, you're staying in France for 6 months, you better learn to speak the language. You're going to learn how to speak the language right quick. Because immersion is one of the best ways to learn how to speak a language. And I know it's a pain in the ass when you first start listening. I really, really do. But make sure you're asking questions in the chat and we will try to break it down for all of you. Castle is not the only SEL thing. Castle is one company within the SEL landscape.
Obligation of rights. It's gone. And so this is all very dangerous.
And are the Canadians taught about their own history concerning native Indians and other people who were harmed by, well, the white Canadians? You have a history as well, a background as well in Canada.
No, I think that history has been repressed in Canada as well. But I think that with the recent discoveries, to say the very least, of the number of children who were killed on the reservations and the harm that basically was produced by that, there's been an enormous effort in Canada to resurrect that history and to take it seriously. Of course, there's a right wing in Canada and all the provinces that wants to eliminate that and certainly doesn't want to see it come into the schools. But there is a collective consciousness that overrides and is far more powerful.
When he says repression, what he means is repressing a far left political ideology in education. I want everyone to recognize this. Every time these people talk about teaching true history, teaching accurate history, teaching whatever like in relation to the public schools, what they mean when they say true history is history with a far left political bias. So when he says they're repressing education, what he means is they're repressing education with a far left political bias. They're trying to depoliticize education, which he already told us at the very beginning of this presentation that he does not like that people are trying to depoliticize education because he says that education cannot be neutral. Rottweiler says, for example, by using generative themes, you basically turn a math lesson into a lecture on oppression and inequity, not inequality, inequity. And they have plausible deniability because it's a math course. Yeah, this is how you're teaching anti-racist math. There are schools all over the country teaching anti-racist math. I have a video on my channel somewhere. It's from a while ago now, but it's actually me reading an entire anti-racist math teacher training textbook. So, yep. Rottweiler, you're completely dead on the money on that one. Thank you. Appreciate it.
About the reservation schools, about the utterly colonial / capitalist sort of attack on indigenous peoples.
Thank you. Thank you, Henry. Thank you. That I knew it. I knew God was pointing me in the direction of this presentation. What did Henry just say? What have I been saying colonization means for the past 2 weeks? What did Henry just fucking say? I'm clipping that shit right now. There it is. See, I told you so. Colonization / capitalism. Almost as if they mean the same fucking thing. Beautiful, just beautiful.
About the reservation schools, about the utterly colonial / capitalist sort of attack on indigenous peoples.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you. Thank you for your service, Henry. We appreciate you saying the quiet part out loud, Henry. We can't do this without you, Henry.
Is not a country that's, unlike the United States, saying these things didn't happen. They're trying to figure out how to deal with this. And of course, when you deal with people who are liberals or conservatives, they never deal with it adequately. Liberals will try to sort of, in some way, engage it without changing the relations of power that produced it. Conservatives not only do not want to change the relations of power, they want to wipe it out of any sort of historical and collective consciousness.
Trump had a Secretary of State called Betsy DeVos, and she was famous for her privatization campaign in education. I don't know a lot about the Biden administration when it comes to education. What about the Biden administration?
Well, I mean, I think the Biden administration, unlike, look, both Republicans and Democrats, traditionally before Trump, right? They never took education seriously as a democratic public force. I mean, whether we were talking about Obama or talking about Clinton, they all see education.
They never took education seriously as a democratic public force. We've already decided that when these people say democratic, they mean they want to control the ideas that you're allowed to consider. And he's complaining that the neoliberals, Obamas, and Clintons never took education seriously as a democratic public force. Does James Lindsay talk about him? Henry Giroux is one of the Marxists James Lindsay talks about most. See? Guys, there are no coincidences. God sends us signs all the time. I stumbled upon Henry accidentally in the recommendations. This is great.
Right? They never took education seriously as a democratic public force. I mean, whether we were talking about Obama or talking about Clinton, they all see education as something linked to business.
No. I am not becoming Catholic. I am not becoming Catholic at all. Stop spreading rumors about me. Don't get the Groypers' hopes up. The Groypers are so hopeful that I'm going to convert to Catholicism, and it's not going to happen.
I mean, you have three models here. In the 1930s and the 1940s, the 1950s, there was some concern in the 60s with John Dewey and others to talk about education as a public good. Then all of a sudden you had this backlash that begins with Sputnik in the United States. And now education is about really, engaging in the Cold War and moving away from liberal education and moving towards science-based education. That becomes instrumentalized education. Then you have another phase where education under the Democrats is all about testing. It's about testing, teaching kids how to take tests, right? And claiming that somehow that's emancipatory. And now under the Republicans,
emancipatory means liberation.
And the Republicans have always been against any kind of critical education. But now under the Republicans, you have a massive effort to really redefine both the nature of learning and the purpose of education in general, which is really on the side of the most reactionary, conservative, fundamentally destructive forms of pedagogy. This is an age of utterly repressive pedagogy, and the Democrats have no answer for it. I mean, they want to eliminate student loans, which is fine, or at least some of them, but that's not the issue. The issue is, you're going to pump money into schools, or you're going to do something to give teachers more room over the conditions of their labor. But I also want to say that in the United States, remember, there are different states that deal with education differently. Massachusetts is not flowery. I mean, there's a huge diversity around education
Ain't that
in the
the
United
truth?
States. And I think certainly the eastern states and in California, there are more progressive views. But remember, we've been defunding education in the United States for so long. Everybody loses, right? I mean, in 1973, you have all of a sudden they put a cap on property taxes, and it just decimated California's education. Decimated.
complaining that they put a cap on property taxes. You want to know how you spot a Marxist, guys? They complain that they put a cap on property taxes. Remember, Marxists don't believe that private property should exist. So one of the ways in which they're going to disincentivize you from owning private property is to say, all right, let's just keeping those property taxes going up and up and up and up and up. And soon it becomes unaffordable to own property because once you buy the property, you can't afford the fucking property tax on top of the money that you already paid to buy the property in the first place. He's like, I cannot believe California put a cap on those pesky property taxes. We could have deprivatized all the property in California if we just kept boosting them.
But not only that, you also have an educational system in the U.S. that's engaged in massive form of social tracking and social sorting, around race, around class. I mean, look.
Hang on, Naruto, thank you for the super chat. What do you got for us today? Just found out that a few of Lauren Chen's shorts on her channel are clips of Vivek. Oh, that's good. Lauren Chen's got a good head on her shoulders. She always has. Always has. Pretends not to be a libertarian, even though she's definitely more libertarian than she wants to. Lauren Chen is more libertarian than she wants people to believe she is. Let me just put it that way.
Look at your Ivy League schools. I mean, look at the various tiers of education you have in the United States. Then you have, now you have a period where education is basically aligned with neoliberalism, certainly higher education. I mean, that's been completely
neoliberalism is too close to
20
capitalism
years.
for them.
And the Democrats have done nothing about that, and the Republicans have reported it. They would like to see everybody basically, be defined through the lens of capital. Good workers, efficient workers, obedient workers.
He just said that neoliberal education is education that defines everyone through the lens of capital. That's because these guys hate liberals more than they hate conservatives. They especially hate neoliberals, who are basically like moderate Democrats or like normal Democrats that aren't totally left wing, because the reason they hate neoliberals is they say it's too close to capitalism. Let's just listen to that again.
Basically aligned with neoliberalism, certainly higher education. I mean, that's been completely transformed in the last 20 years. And the Democrats have done nothing about that, and the Republicans have reported it. They would like to see everybody basically, be defined through the lens of capital. Good workers, efficient workers, obedient workers. And in the meantime, concentrate power in the hands of a corporate elite that now they don't call themselves presidents anymore. They call themselves CEOs, right?
You taught in high school in the 50s, I believe, or in the 60s. In the 60s.
In the 60s.
In the 60s, yes. And last time we spoke, you told me about a principal or a dean who didn't really understand the way you were teaching. You were teaching, your students were sitting in a circle and you had different ideas. And you said when the principal or dean or whatever was complaining about your way of teaching, you didn't really have a language to express yourself and to explain to the dean what is happening in your classroom. Now you do, but many teachers don't have that language. So what I would like to find out is, how do we create an environment where there is room for critical pedagogy in this rigid system we're dealing with? Because, as you know, teachers are subject to so many standardized tests, punitive accountability, teaching methods. We don't have a lot of freedom in classrooms, and yet what society needs right now today is critical pedagogy. So
well, I think it's the wrong question. I think it's an interesting question, but it doesn't start in the right place. And the question is not what can we do immediately. The question is, what kind of vision do we have for schooling? You have to start with a vision. What do you want? I mean, how do you want to define education? That's the first question. And if you want to claim that education is inextricably linked to matters of democracy and should be a democratic public good, then you have to ask yourself, what are the forces that are destroying education as a public good? And how does that manifest itself? And then it tends to manifest itself in more microaggressions that you've just suggested.
Ding, ding,
Teachers
ding.
lose their autonomy in the classroom, subjected to standardized tests. They're now being assaulted by right-wing goons, who claim that they can't teach anything that has to do with critical thinking or critical pedagogy and so forth and so on.
Critical
And I
pedagogy is
think that
not
what
critical
teachers have
thinking.
to do are maybe three things. One, they need a language to understand that education is a site of political struggle. That's what it is. And secondly, they need to understand they can't do it alone, that they have to do it collectively, and that we have enormous examples historically and in the present moment in a variety of countries where educators are rising up in social movements and aligning with other social movements. And
Educators are rising up in social movements and aligning with other social movements. Well, why would they do that? Are you kind of saying that that educators are now activists engaging in a perpetual struggle or perpetual revolution? Yes, perhaps fugitive pedagogy is the answer. Indeed. What is fugitive pedagogy? Does anyone know? Pop quiz. If you follow my work, you should know this. What does fugitive pedagogy mean? Come on, I know you guys know the answer to this. What does fugitive pedagogy mean? Yes. Hiding what they're doing, or James Jones says, sneaking in educational material into the classroom that the school doesn't know about, smuggling critical theory in banned states, going rogue, smuggling it into states. Exactly. Smuggling ideas into classrooms where those ideas are illegal. And if you don't think that's happening in Florida, I know it's happening in Florida. Ron DeSantis doesn't care that it's happening in Florida. I know because I sent Ron DeSantis and Ron DeSantis' office proof that it's happening in Florida, and they didn't do anything because Ron DeSantis doesn't actually care about these issues. He only runs on them as part of a campaign. He doesn't actually care about them. Disappointing. I know.
thirdly, I think they could have asked themselves a fundamental question, and that is, what kind of future do they want for children, for young people? I mean, how do they imagine a future, and how does education literally fit into that? And probably finally, where are the resources to get the language that they need?
Remember that when these people are saying imagining a future, what type of future does Henry imagine? When they say imagining a future, visioning a future, and then creating the type of education to create that future, what type of future does Henry imagine? What type of future does Henry want? What type of future does Henry want to push education to create? The socialist utopia, the Marxist utopia, an equitable utopia. Equity means Marxism. They want their Marxist utopia. That's okay. We can have typos. The socialists, Marxist utopia, the utopia. Just like the Ohio State University, someone referred to me as the Carlin Borisenko on Twitter the other day. Like the was purposeful, and I was like, all right, I'll take that, as though there are two of us in the world. I'm sure. Anyway, Marxist utopia, socialist utopia, brave new world, creative answer. I like that. Exactly, guys. The 4 goals of the woke left are always and forever the same. Gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. The Marxist utopia is always the goal. I deliberately use the word utopia because that's what they use to describe it. They do believe it will be a utopia. They do believe that real socialism has never been tried, and they're going to get it right this time. Pinky swear, trust me, bro. That is what they're going for. That's always what they're going for. And Henry here is telling us that the whole idea of critical pedagogy is to vision the future Marxist utopia that they want, and then to use education to get the young minds of the future to a place where they are creating that utopia.
be able to understand that. And there are enormous numbers of stuff online and available that people can read and join with others, and it's happening. I mean, I'm asked to give, to engage with people online all the time who are grappling with particular questions that you raised. But we don't begin with those particular questions. We begin with the larger vision that people should insert themselves in to understand why they need to do what they do. And it goes from there, because otherwise you reduce education to simply a strategy. And it's not a strategy and simply a method. It's a moral and political project. And the question is, how does a strategy now align with that, given the specific context in which people find themselves? Because the question of context is important. I mean, the other side of this is that, not only are we talking about the need for people to learn how to struggle collectively, we're also dealing with
Struggle
something else, and
collectively.
that is, how do we give them both a language of critique and a language of possibility? How do we say, there are a couple of terms that I'm playing with that are not mine, that are Stuart Hall's, but that are really important. And one is, what is it about the present conjuncture that we live in? Meaning, what is unique to this particular period that we have to recognize? And one of the things that we have to recognize is not only that education is under massive siege by the right, the neo-Nazis, and the right-wing fundamentalists and Christian nationalists, but the other side of this is that education is so fundamental to democracy itself and so fundamental to politics that we have to recognize that school is not the only site of education. It's not the only site. That the culture now, with this integration of the new technology, popular education, political education, and power and everyday life, has fashioned a moment that is overwhelming in terms of the power, the educational force of the larger culture. So we have to move between those two moments, particularly with.
Hang on, Curtis is asking a question. I want the chat to answer this question for Curtis. Curtis, welcome. I don't recognize you, so I'm going to assume you're new. Glad to have new people here. Their whole system is based on struggle. If they win, the struggle goes away. Well, but does it? But does it? Guys, pop quiz for the chat. When these people use the term struggle, what do they mean? And does it ever go away? They find a new struggle. I think they do that, but what does that mean? The struggle never ends. They find a new struggle. They come up with something else. Struggle means perpetual revolution. The revolution is perpetual. The revolution never stops. It's like in 1984. You know how in 1984 they were constantly at war with either Eurasia or East Asia? And when the war ended with Eurasia, they immediately went to war with East Asia. And when the war ended with East Asia, they immediately went to war with Eurasia. The war never ended. The war was perpetual. The struggle is perpetual. The revolution is perpetual. It never stops. It might change forms, but it doesn't stop. The struggle is eternal. There's always something. It does not end. Exactly. The revolution is perpetual. Struggle always means revolution. The revolution is eternal, or else the new status quo becomes right-wing by definition, according to Fieri. There will always be something new to struggle about, like the old phrase, pop will eat itself. Exactly. Well done, guys. Very well done. Curtis, I hope that helped. Might be a little frightening, but that's the correct answer.
Students who are being educated far more, I think, outside of schools than in school. So how do we relate to students around that, rather than make it appear as if that the only place they can learn is in schools? Secondly, how do you talk about giving teachers more control over their working conditions? Well, you don't talk about them closing the door and going in the classroom and sort of, acting in a way that they can't be seen and privatizing their own methods or approaches. You have to talk about them working collectively, right? To create the conditions where they can come down and put pressure on these administrations and learn to fight back, particularly against school boards that are becoming increasingly reactionary.
Curtis says, but then I see a vacuum of a power struggle between the different factions. No, you don't. You don't. You might think you do, but you don't. These people are actually incredibly in line with what their goals are that they're trying to achieve. What you might see is lower level people bickering. There's always going to be bickering here and there, but you don't see a real power struggle because they're always and forever moving towards the same goals. I understand why you might think you do, but it's probably a reflection of just the groups that you're looking at and not looking in the right places.
Thirdly, it seems to me you have to come to grips with an overall logic that defines the rest of society. And that is a neoliberalism that so depoliticizes people. It says all problems are individual, that private troubles can't be translated to systemic considerations, nothing is connected. It creates a massive, what I would call historical moment of cynicism and despair. Nothing can be done. And I think the second term, when I talked about conjuncture, how you have to recognize the uniqueness, right, is to try to understand this moment of contingency. There's always resistance. Resistance is always going on. And you have to broaden the space for that and to begin to figure out what the strategies would be to make it work. So, I mean, these are all political questions. And I think that, that's what we need to do. We need to, make it clear that the struggle over democracy, the struggle over the future, the struggle over agency, the struggle over identity is really in part about the struggle over education, both in and outside of schools.
Thank you, Henry.
And maybe
I knew it. I knew he was building up to something good. I knew it. I knew he was going to give us a nice little golden nugget. I got to clip that. Thank you, Henry. Rottweiler says, infighting is only possible when there's individualism. They're collectivists. They believe in Mao's unity. That's why the Marxist left is more effective than the right at the moment. Great point, Rottweiler. Really great point. Let me get my little clipping to... God damn it. This presentation's so good.
And to begin to figure out what the strategies would be to make it work. So, I mean, these are all political questions. And I think that, that's what we need to do. We need to, make it clear that the struggle over democracy, the struggle over the future, the struggle over agency, the struggle over identity is really in part about the struggle over education, both in and outside of schools. And maybe one last thing. I don't see how you can do any of this without developing a set of anti-capitalist values. I mean, I think that the talk about capitalism and democracy is an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. Any society that claims that profit is more important than human needs is a dying society. And it's just a matter of time before that society will exhaust itself and all of a sudden turn to fascism in order to legitimate itself. And I think that's what we're now seeing. Neoliberalism has failed on its promises. So now it blames blacks, blames refugees, blames immigrants, blames Muslims, anything to deflect, its own systemic economic failures and the massive amount, and I use this word very, very strongly, the massive amount of inequality it has caused. Because that's the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is inequality. Massive inequality in wealth and power, not just on a national level, but mostly on a global level. I mean, power is global now. Let's be realistic. These people have, these corporations, the financial elite, they have no concern with nation states as political entities.
All right, that's enough. I'm so happy right now. I'm so happy. That was so beautiful. Oh my God, I love this guy. We're going to watch everything Henry says on the internet. Henry is going to become our new Sophie. We need to watch as much Henry as we can before he dies. That was glorious. Glorious. Oh my God. Did anyone else get like a little, like butterflies in their stomach, a little tingle? I did. Absolutely. Kansas Mama says, what is their definition of democracy? Their definition of democracy, Kansas Mama, is central state control over every single idea that you are allowed to consider. That is what their definition of democracy is. It has nothing to do with voting at all. Their definition of democracy is the state tells you what you can and cannot think.
That basically have control over their own resources. They could care less.
Yeah.
That's for sure. We live in a global capitalist war culture. That's what we live in. And that culture, that war is being waged subjectively, pedagogically, and it's being waged economically and militarily. It's a permanent war culture. And I think we need a new language to basically name this.
Yeah, well, actually, Hannah Arendt named that development a long time ago in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. She said in the future, totalitarianism won't come in the form of a fancy dictator like Hitler or Stalin. It's going to be these big organizations and corporates who don't have one single face, which is very difficult to combat because nobody is responsible. And these giant corporates, it also reminds me of the term inverted totalitarianism. Sheldon Wolin came up with that, coined that term in 2003. So it's very hard today to pinpoint totalitarianism because we don't have a single dictator anymore.
I don't think it's hard to pinpoint it at all. I think that it's very evident. I mean, you have people all over the world right now who are very upfront about fascism and in naming it. I mean, whether you're talking about Orban in Hungary, who claims that he doesn't believe in democracy, he believes in illiberal democracy, or you have Bolsonaro, and of course in Brazil, who basically claims that he supports the dictators of the past. You know, he wants to be like them, right? And if he gets reelected, could basically be partly responsible for destroying the world because of his destruction of the Amazon. I mean, I think that what we're seeing now, unlike what you're suggesting, is something that we haven't seen since the 30s, and that is a full-fledged embrace of fascist politics, upgraded in different contexts, in different societies. That is unapologetic.
I feel like I need to watch Rollerball again, and I really don't want to because Rollerball is a horrible movie. It's a horrible movie. The original Rollerball was horrible, and the remake of Rollerball was even worse than the original, and I didn't think such a thing was possible. I tried to like Rollerball. I really did. I feel like I need to watch it again because I haven't watched it in a long time since before I got into all this stuff for like the greater themes of Rollerball. But can we all just acknowledge that Rollerball is a horrible fucking movie?
It's unapologetic about its hatred of democracy. I mean, look at the United States. You have a modern Republican Party that espouses white supremacy, is waging war on the public good, waging war on the welfare state. And who does it look to? Engages in massive lies, claims the election was rigged, is filled.
Bill says, interesting that his argument is that all capitalist systems end in fascism. Bill, these people literally believe, you can go back and watch the Antifa lecture from Hofstra University we watched maybe a couple months ago. I have a clip of it on my Substack as well. These people quite literally define fascism as free market capitalism. Capitalism is fascism. It's not that capitalism leads to fascism. It's that capitalism is fascism. That's their definition of it. They say it explicitly. I have a clip of this on my Substack. It is explicit.
With conspiracy lunatics and theorists, and who do they point to as their model? Orban. I mean, let's think about that, right? Orban, who suppresses the press, who talks about he doesn't want to have mixed races in Europe, who basically uses the language of racial cleansing and white supremacy to define himself. And that now becomes so. To say that fascism is one big thing that we don't see, I don't buy that. It's very visible. And now that it's so visible, we need to have a language that connects it, that connects the language to the policies, as my wife would say, to everyday life. What are the policies? How do they, in the name of fascism, materialize? How do they get
Hang
named?
on.
You know, when
Noah, you've been watching me long enough to know that we're not interested here in what the actual definition is. We are interested in what these people believe the definition is. These are two different questions, okay? So it does not matter that their definition is wrong. The point is that we're trying to understand what they believe. Tayton says fascism equals against their struggle, which is capitalism. No, I don't agree, Tayton. Like I said, I literally have them on video saying that fascism means free market capitalism. I have it. Like, this is not theoretical. I have it. It's on my Substack. I did a whole. That's not the fucking point, Noah, and you know it. You know it. This is not about debunking them. This is about understanding what they believe so then we can predict what they are going to do next. What the real definition of fascism or any other word is immaterial to what we're doing here. No, this is not correct. This is not correct either. The struggle is the perpetual revolution to create the Marxist utopia.
Republicans now in the United States say we're going to ban books because we don't believe that young people should learn about race relations or slavery. We have to name that. I mean,
to be really clear, guys, the reason we don't spend all of our time debunking these people is if debunking these people was what was required to defeat them, then we already would be winning. Because people for decades, conservatives for decades, oh, that's not the right definition. That's not what that means. These people are stupid. Here are all the reasons these people are stupid. Here's why they're stupid. Like, if debunking these people was what was required to defeat these people, then we already would win. But debunking them accomplishes nothing. All it does is say, oh, they're just stupid and they don't understand what it means and la 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 la, and we can just debunk them and that means we can ignore them because they're stupid and they don't know what it means. And then these people keep winning and everyone starts wondering why. Well, guys, guess what? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again and expecting a different result. We're doing something different. I do not want the debunking thing in my chat, Noah. I have said this many times. You have been here when I've said it, and I'm asking you to stop. It is a distraction. That is not what we're doing here. Everyone watching right now has access to a dictionary, bro. They can look it up on their own. It's not what we're doing here. We're doing something different. If your strategy worked, we would already be winning.
When I write a piece about that, I don't say, this is an attack on Black kids, in Black history. I say it's also an attack on white kids because they're not prepared now or educated to deal with white supremacy.
White supremacy means capitalism.
No to challenge it.
That means
and
capitalism.
They're on video games and on the internet being seduced into this language that they're not learning.
Eliza, what you need to do right now is to learn to speak their language. You don't need to do anything else other than learning to speak their language. Until you learn how to speak their language, there is nothing else that you can do. And there are no other tactics that I'm going to give you until you learn how to speak their language. Stop jumping right to tactics. I used to make this mistake. In fact, I wrote a whole book about tactics with checklists that gave tactics. Guess what? People didn't do it or they implemented it incorrectly because they did not know how to speak their language. What you need to worry about right now is understanding what they're saying. Until you can sit through, here's going to be our rule of thumb from now on, guys. Until you can sit through a full Marxist presentation and understand exactly what they're saying, you are not ready to do anything yet. You have to understand them in order to fight back. If you try to fight back without understanding them, you are going to be fighting the wrong problem and you are going to fail because you are fighting the wrong problem because you do not understand what you're fighting.
In schools. And so it's not just, the people who are suffering here is unreal and expansive. Now, the other issue is when we say it's not visible enough. Think about how the language of disposability, this pedagogical language of disposability, has all of a sudden mushroomed. It's not just about anti-Semitism. It's about racism. It's about refugees. It's about Muslims. It's about transgender youth. When you look at what is going on in Florida with transgender youth, it's about the suppression of women's reproductive rights. Reproductive rights. Abolishing abortion is mind-blowing to me. mind-blowing. And the real question here that I have to raise as an educator is, where's the resistance? Where is the massive resistance? You know, as Rania, my wife, reminds me, in Greece, during the Nazi occupation, when you look at the way the Greek resistance responded to that, and we live in a time of occupation. I mean, I don't see any, I mean, granted, the Nazis were more ruthless with the Gestapo and the Secret Service, but you live in an age of massive surveillance. You live in an age where people are signing loyalty oaths, where people are being fired from their jobs. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, where is the subjective dimension that people can inhabit to be able to both recognize themselves in a more critical language, in which they can understand what's happening to themselves, and get out of this privatized capitalist bubble, you know,
privatized
where
capitalist
they suffer from
bubble.
a kind of narcissistic zombieism.
They believe that private property, privatization, anything that's privatized, anything that's not about the collective, is inherently linked with capitalism. Anytime you hear the terms privatized, think capitalism, and that means it's their enemy. They want everything to be public. Everything is part of the collective.
You know, and be able to understand the connections they have with other human beings. What we have seen pedagogically is the collapse of solidarity. The social is under attack. And I don't just...
Solidarity means being a member of the party. It means being a comrade. It means being an ally. Ally is the first step towards comrade.
It means social spheres where you have social provisions, a social wage, or you have free healthcare or free education. I mean, the very connections between us are being dissolved in what I would call part of this permanent war culture, which is we're at war with each other. There's only one person left on the island, right? I mean, what becomes the model for human relationships is reality TV.
Yeah.
It's a terrible model, you know, and that's part of what I call neoliberal pedagogy. Neoliberalism is not just about economics. I think the left has made, the so-called left, has really made a terrible choice in believing that domination is only about hardcore economic institutions. Of course it's about that, but it's also about something else. I remember Bourdieu said something to the effect, he said, we have to recognize that...
Hey, Mitchell, I appreciate the question. This is a really easy one to answer, but I want to do this as a pop quiz for the chat. Are communism and socialism linked? This is a pop quiz for the chat. Let's all answer Mitchell so we can get a variety of feedback. Are communism and socialism linked? How would you answer that? Eliza, try not to get turned off by me if I get a little bit persnickety or like yelly. I want you to learn, and I want people to learn. So I'm glad you found me. And I'll teach you, girl. I will teach you things that you never knew existed. Got to stick around, though. Got to learn first. I promise we'll get to tactics once you learn. All right. Are communism and socialism linked? Yes. How are they linked? Everyone's saying yes, they are linked. Communism and socialism are linked. How are they linked? How are they linked? According to the people that we watch, the far left socialists, they use the terms interchangeably. They use the terms interchangeably. These people view them as interchangeable. They're kind of interchangeable. They use the terms interchangeably. Marxist, socialist, communists will call themselves Marxist, socialists, and communists within the same sentence. They use them interchangeably. Now, if we're going to get technical about it, communism is the goal of socialism. Socialism is the transition to communism. Okay? So we want to think of them as interchangeable. There are, of course, nuances between the two if we're talking about it from a technical dictionary definition perspective. But for our purposes, we use them as interchangeable because socialism leads to communism. That is the only place that it goes. Communism is the end result of socialism, and these people refer to themselves as communist, socialist, Marxists within the same sentence. Well done, guys.
The most important forms of domination, and not only economic, but also intellectual and pedagogical, and lie on the side of belief and persuasion. And now we live in a world with these cultural apparatuses, driven by these new technologies in the social media. Think about Elon Musk taking over Twitter, who now is going to allow Trump, basically a psychotic criminal, to basically now come online and turn Twitter once again into a massive megaphone for hate and racism. It's a serious,
But he says he's a defender of free speech, but I don't believe when Tesla employers will complain about their working conditions, he will allow it. So he's a defender of free speech as long as it suits him, of course.
No, I mean you're absolutely right. Look, free speech in a capitalist economy is like free dog shit. Anybody can sleep under a bridge and anybody can sleep at the Ritz. Well, I don't think so, right? I mean, people who control the cultural apparatuses, they limit free speech. They limit it with their ideologies and they cover it up with the notion that it's free. Well, it's not free, because if you don't understand the relationship between choice and constraints, you're disillusioned. Choice is based upon the kinds of constraints you operate in. If you're poor, those constraints are massive. Time is not a luxury, it's a deprivation. If you operate under a politics of mere survival, and you have to make a choice between food and drugs, those choices are limited. When you have these massive inequalities, these constraints are overwhelming based upon particular modes of discrimination, class, gender, sexual orientation. And all of that in the mythology and the pedagogy of neoliberalism gets erased, right? Because if you have a problem, that's character. It's about character. It's about willpower. You don't try hard enough. You don't pick yourself up by your bootstraps. It's pure nonsense. And it's one of the most powerful ideologies we have seen since the divine right of kings. It cripples people. It depoliticizes people. And it sustains a fascist logic in which the struggle for solidarity is overtaken by the the pathological release of hatred and rabid emotions and bigotry.
What's the antidote to neoliberalism? What's your
God.
Democratic socialism is the antidote.
I fucking love this guy. This guy is the best. Why did I find this guy like 6 months ago? I would have read Pedagogy of the Oppressed much sooner. The antidote to neoliberalism is democratic socialism. Oh God, you guys know I have to clip that. We're gonna run a little bit long today, guys. Maybe we're gonna watch as much as we can until 7 o'clock. I might just have to watch the rest on my own. I just got to clip that though. That was great.
What's the antidote to neoliberalism? What's your what?
Democratic socialism is the antidote.
Does it mean a stronger role for the government? The same government that was responsible for introducing neoliberalism.
No. I don't buy it at all. That operates off the assumption that when you talk about the government, you talk about politics, and you talk about power, that the government only has one role, and that's repression. I don't believe that, and I've never believed it. I think the government can absolutely be organized in the service of social responsibility, and it's not a corporate-based government. It's a state-based political government, one that takes power seriously, one that takes questions of the social contract seriously, one that tries to eliminate inequality, one that suppresses those anti-democratic forces that basically produce misery, hatred, and suffering, one that believes, if I can put it gently, both the civic consciousness and social justice. So I think your sense, your implication that government is always on the side of domination is actually quite reactionary, because it feeds into the assumption that there's nothing that can be done when political power has to be exercised on, let's say, an international level.
Hello, Marcus. Hello, Marcus. Hello. What's repressive tolerance, Rottweiler? Can you educate us in the chat? Because you just have a way with these things of explaining it really easily. While I'm clipping this. This guy is the king. Henry. Henry's going to be my new best friend. Henry's going to be my new Sophie. Hopefully Henry won't want to sleep with me like Sophie obviously does, but that's okay. Sophie's hot. She's allowed to want to sleep with me.
right? I mean, that's at least that's my opinion. Yeah.
You mentioned new media quite a lot of times. So what's the role of new media when it comes to critical pedagogy? I think it offers solutions, but it's a threat as well. I know for a fact that many of my students do not know how to discern between fake news and facts.
I
So
think everybody should read Jonathan Crowley's Scorched Earth. It's an absolutely the most brilliant book I've ever read on the social media. And while he takes a very hard line and argues that it does the things that probably you and I would agree on, right? That it disembodies people. It doesn't really lead to radical social movements. It produces demonstrations rather than long-term systemic organizations. But what he says endlessly is that you can't talk about the social media without talking about inequality and capitalism and questions of control. You can't do it. You know,
I just want to point out that every time he says the term inequality, what he really means is inequity. What I'm betting happened is he's a little old school, so he hasn't quite like integrated the term equity into his language, because equity as a term only became like popular to describe this about 15 years ago. And so he's old school. So he's thinking anytime, but he does not mean equality. When he says equality, he does not mean that. He means equity.
you can't say, because the social media might be helpful with medical records, it might, all the things that we can point to that would be helpful. I mean, my wife and I, we can go online and get, and you, I'm sure we get sources in a minute. You and I can talk, right, across time and space. But in the long run, overall, this is controlled by very few people. And that's where the danger lies. The danger lies in not so much in, I mean, the technology has its own distinct characteristics that you have to be aware of. The enormous potential for separation and disembodiment, among others. But at the same time, the fundamental question is about power. It's really
Marcuse's repressive tolerance: movements from the right must be repressed, movements from the left must be propped up. Exactly. Exactly. Thank you, Rottweiler.
about power and vision, and whether or not that media can be democratized and used by people for the service of people, rather than used by people like Elon Musk, right, to basically spread hatred and claim that he loves gay, the ultimate now celebrity anti-Semite,
yeah, it reminds me of these images from Iran in where these women are protesting the regime, and because of social media, that these protests are spreading throughout the world. I think that's a really positive effect of social media.
No, I think, yeah, no, it is, of course it is. I mean, I think that one of the things that any media should help to do, and this new media with its global capacity to instruct, makes power visible, particularly oppressive power, and it informs in ways that might suggest new forms of demonstration, new forms of
Thank you,
resistance.
OG Nick. I appreciate your
But
DM.
remember, they can close down the media. They close down the internet.
That's true.
That, let's not be romantic here about this. I mean, for all the things that we can mention work, it's still still private interest and authoritarian interests that are controlling this media. And I think that to the degree that you move away from that, we begin to engage in a kind of Pollyannish sort of notion that undermines how censorship works when aligned with power. And not only how censorship works, how matters of persuasion and pedagogy work with respect to this media, right? For me, the answer is not just to say, as I just said, that it's about massive control of the media that has to be dealt with. It's also about educating young people not to be simply consumers of the media. We've got to educate people to be producers of the media, right? I mean, they've got to be able to produce their own radio shows, their own television shows. They've got to be able to do what you do. They've got to be able to have one foot in and one foot out of these massive cultural apparatuses. I mean, if talented people can only end up working for Elon Musk, or can only end up working for Disney, or one of the 5 social media giants that control 95% of the media in the United States, what's the point of that? right? That's glass ceiling reformism. That's all that is. But I mean, we have to talk about where the spaces are to turn those medias into the subject of what we would call acts of the radical imagination.
Radical means socialist.
Alternative educational forces that increasingly educate people about how that media might be understood as a site of political struggle and not just a site of convenience for shopping online, for teaching online, for talking to each other online.
So he's saying he wants to proactively indoctrinate people to see media as a site of political struggle. That's nice, Henry.
To do online dating, because that's all privatized nonsense. That's really what that is. Ultimately, that collapses into the language of privatization.
That's true. Because, a couple of months ago, I interviewed Chris Hedges. You know him. You did an interview as well with him. And all his material was removed from YouTube because he writes articles for RT, Russia Today. So
my interview was removed as well.
Really? Yeah, and I talked to Glenn Greenwald, and more and more journalists are taking refuge to platforms such as Substack, like you do as well.
I don't use it, but yeah, people do. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think in let's say 10 years from now, it's still possible to be critical online?
I think it's increasingly going to be more difficult to be critical as
See you, Chad.
Becomes more concentrated in relatively few hands. And any semblance of what it means to live in a democratic country gives way to governments that claim that democracy is an evil and that dissent basically is part of that evil. I think that's the great fight we're having today. I mean, the fight is not between simply democracy and authoritarianism. The fight is between democracy and a radical democratic socialist democracy, and a fight against capitalism. It's a fight for socialist democracy against two things. It's a fight against capitalism, and it's a fight against fascism. And the fight against capitalism and fascism are part of the same body.
I told you so. I told you so. Who doubted me? Who doubted me that fascism meant capitalism? I want to see $2 super chats. Thank you, Henry. Thank you. This guy, man, this guy. I want to kiss this guy right now so bad. We're going to watch everything this guy has ever said on the internet. We love you, Henry. We're your new biggest fans.
Between simply democracy and authoritarianism. The fight is between democracy and a radical democratic socialist democracy.
Even that, like the fight,
and that dissent
even
basically.
Even that part, the fight isn't between democracy and authoritarianism. The fight is between democracy and radical social democracy. It's like, bro. I love old people. Old people have no filter.
Is part of that evil. I think that's the great fight we're having today. I mean, the fight is not between simply democracy and authoritarianism. The fight is between democracy and a radical democratic socialist democracy, and a fight against capitalism. It's a fight for socialist democracy against two things. It's a fight against capitalism, and it's a fight against fascism. And the fight against capitalism and fascism are part of the same body. They're linked. You can't talk about fascism without talking about capitalism. I don't believe that anymore. And I think we need a new language to rephrase the struggle, and we need a new language to see education as central to politics itself. And I think that when we reduce education to question of methods, questions of technique, instrumental questions, we really have lost it, because we have no way of understanding education as part of what Adorno once called the totality. The totality. How is it being used as part of a larger totality to reproduce structures of power under the aegis of global capitalism that are destroying the world? I mean, when I talk to my friend Noam Chomsky, Chomsky says, look, think about it. That clock that says, we're 10 minutes away from destroying.
Doomsday clock, yeah.
Doomsday clock. I mean,
hang on, that's good enough. That clip. Oh God, that clip was everything. I'm so turned on right now. I'm not even lying. I feel like I need to postpone my Zoom and like just like go get Victor and like go take it. I'm so turned on by now by this guy. Like I can't even tell you. This guy is everything. This guy is my new best friend. This guy, we're gonna be watching this guy all week. That was just everything. I've never. This is amazing.
What is it? 1 minute now?
Yeah.
And the question now becomes, if you don't understand the problem, you can't address it. And if you don't understand an issue and you don't recognize how it affects your life in relation to others, you're going to either be cynical, you're going to turn to the right, or basically you're going to just drop out, right? I mean, and talk about living your life outside of all of this. And that's a scary moment.
Thank you.
Crisis
I
should
appreciate it.
create openings for possibilities.
Crisis
And where
creates
they
opening for
don't, that's a failure
possibilities.
of education.
Wow.
That's a failure of education, not just repression. And I don't think we've come to grips with that yet. I don't think the importance of education in the 21st century.
Yeah, Victor's downstairs like, what the fuck is going on? And do I need to take off my pants right now? Reddin, thank you for the super chat. This is a good use of my fascist capitalism. I usually waste it, but this is so worth it. Thank you, Renan. I do appreciate that. All right, guys, just as a reminder, I do have a community Zoom call starting at 7 p.m. So we're not going to be able to finish this presentation today. But don't worry. We've gotten a lot out of it. We're going to watch for a couple more minutes and we're going to see if anything else pops up. But don't worry. Don't mind that we aren't finishing this presentation today, because now through a twist of fate, we have been introduced to Henry. We're going to see a lot more of Henry. Henry is our new best friend. Henry is going to say so many quiet parts out loud. It's going to be great. And so that's what it is. That's what it is. Kansas Mama, you have to remember, they're not using the term fascism for the proper definition. They're saying that capitalism is fascism. The oppressive regime of capitalism is fascism, because capitalism capitalism keeps the masses oppressed because they're constantly trying to generate profit for the bourgeois, and that's why it's fascism. I mean, there's a longer explanation too. I don't have time to go into it right now, but Kansas Mama, I would recommend you watch Socialism Saturday from this past week, the property regime or the abuse of property. And that will explain a lot, but they use them. It's not that capitalism leads to fascism in their minds. It's that capitalism is fascism. I know. I just DM'd Sophie the other day and I said, Sophie, I agree with you on Palestine. I was trying to build a bridge. I'm trying to get Sophie to come on the channel. Sophie she didn't answer. She's too busy out protesting for Palestine. I support that, man, because I'm on Team Free Palestine on this one. Anyway, let's watch for a couple more minutes.
Has been adequately recognized. We're not talking about ideology anymore in the most narrow sense of the term. We're talking about the production of identities, subjectivities, how people define themselves, whether they can recognize themselves in larger structures, whether the civic culture is collapsing, and whether there's any room for forms of education that basically are wedded to creating people who can take control of their lives and link that with the questions of social justice and social responsibility.
Well, was education ever meant to raise critical citizens? Do you believe that? Maybe in the ancient Greece society, maybe. But
I don't think it's a question of whether it ever did that. I think it's a question of whether it always contained a possibility for doing it. That's the important question for me. I mean, I think education has always been operated at the edge of possibility. So I'm not going to fall into that trap of saying, well, it's always been domineering, and so therefore power and domination, exist in a mutually sutured way, and there's no possibility. Education is central to what it means to be an agent. The question is, where is it taking place that proves its possibilities? Whether we're talking about Summerhill, free schools, or a whole range of educational movements that took place under Paulo Freire in Brazil. I mean, in Chile, students are, look at students. I mean, students internationally are probably now the most active group in the world fighting for social justice. Look at you mentioned Iran. I mean, the jihad, the fight over over the morality police. If that isn't a merging of education and politics, what is? Only that politics is taking place in the street.
Yeah.
That education is taking place among young people who recognize that in their solidarity, they can fight the mullahs, that there's a possibility there. They may not win, but that's where education operates on the edge of resistance, critique, and possibility. And that's what we should recognize, rather than simply smothering it in a notion that education is always about domination, right?
Yeah. Well, their criticism on the system didn't come from education. It came from, well, talking about Iran, it came from elsewhere, somewhere else. And that's fascinating.
No, their criticism came out of an event in which they had to theoretically and politically put together a series of assumptions about what it meant in order to form their own sense of individual and collective agency. That's educational.
All right, guys. I think that's where we're going to end it today. I feel like that's a good ending point. Again, I apologize we didn't get through the whole presentation because there was just so much to clip because Henry is our new best friend. We love Henry. We need to send Henry positive vibes that he lives a very long time because apparently he's 80 years old. He's looking good for 80, though, so he's taking care of himself. We need a Henry speaking on the internet as often as Henry wants to. I think that Henry should talk as much. Thank you, Henry. Thank you. We appreciate it. Rottweiler says critical education equals critical denunciation, meaning denounce everything you don't control until you control it. Remember, guys, everything the left does is always about power. It is always about control. All right, that's going to wrap us up for today because I have to go do a call with my supporter community. Now, if you would like to join my private unrecorded Zoom call starting in 6 minutes, the very best thing for you to do is to head over to my Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. I'll pop the link in the chat over on YouTube and over on Rumble. Thank you guys for watching me on whatever platform you're watching on. I do stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. And if you want to support the work I'm doing and get access to the private community Zoom that I'm going to be starting in about 5 minutes, please head over to my Substack, sign up for a subscription, $8 a month, $80 a year. You get access to all the resources on my Substack, which is my content hub on the internet. And where you find the link for the community Zoom is to go into this here Unwoke Roundup email. You click on it. You scroll all the way down to the bottom. And if you are a paid subscriber on the Substack, this red box will not be here. What will be there is a list of links. You're going to find the Zoom link for tonight at 7 p.m. You're going to find the Zoom link for Wednesday at noon because I do 2 supporter calls a week. You are also going to find a link to the supporter Discord where you can join and interact with us and come to movie nights on Sundays or writers group on Thursdays. And you'll get access to other perks as well as I do them. There may be some spy streams coming up, and spy streams are now supporter only because it just makes it easier for me to do it. So please, guys, do support the work I'm doing if you can. I do appreciate it. $8 a month, $80 a year. And I'm completely funded by you. I can't do it without you. All right, guys, that's all I've got. Thank you for hanging out with us today. It was a good eventful Monday. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. Take care. We'll see you soon.